Okay, this question is, what is the Pali word for meditate? What's the meaning of the Pali word? I mentioned that briefly this morning. Of course, meditation is an English word, and the Pali language is a sort of a dialect from North India, 2,000 years ago, and it's close to Sanskrit. But the word that's normally translated as meditation is bhavana. So just that book that we have from the Bhavana Society, you've heard of the Bhavana Society. Well, that's what it came from, the Meditation Society. But actually the word itself means to cultivate. So it comes from the word bhava. So it has the kind of meaning of growing or developing or to become. And it refers to growing the mind in wholesome qualities. So developing the mind, but along spiritual lines. And there's different types of meditation. And because there's different ways we can cultivate the mind. So there's the metta bhavana, which is called the development of loving friendliness. And that sutra that we just read in English, that's called the Metta Sutra, and that's a traditional form of the metta bhavana, that we're cultivating friendliness and goodwill toward all living beings, rather than cultivating ill will and animosity or hatred towards others. It's an antidote for anger and hatred and resentment and prejudice and things like that directed towards others. So it's an antidote. And so most of the forms of bhavana, meditation, are antidotes for their opposite. So there's the metta bhavana, and then there's also what is called the shamatha bhavana, which means cultivating tranquility. Now some people call it concentration, but tranquility is a better term, because this idea of concentrating on a single object is, not exactly how it goes. But it's more you're tranquilizing the thoughts by developing mindfulness and limiting your focus of attention and so on. But anyway, there's tranquility meditation, which is like the anapanasati, is one of the more popular forms. It tranquilizes the way incessant thinking, and it tranquilizes the hindrances. But so does mindfulness. And mindfulness or vipassana meditation is called vipassana, means the development of wisdom. And so usually tranquility and wisdom are the two main mental qualities that we cultivate in our meditation practice. The other ones are supplementary meditations, like the metta bhavana or the brahma vihara bhavana, where you're cultivating also compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. So you're cultivating these wholesome qualities as an antidote for the negative qualities. So metta is an antidote for ill will and resentment towards people. Compassion or karuna is an antidote for cruelty, the tendency wanting to be cruel to people or even animals, like to kick a dog or whatever, or just cruelty, which can manifest as physical actions or even speech, like calling people dirty names with hatred behind it, and to be cruel to them, right? Insulting them, telling ethnic jokes, all this kind of stuff. That's why these are part of the wrong speech. So the development of the karuna is an antidote for cruelty, and the sympathetic joy is an antidote for jealousy and envy. Having ill will if somebody else receives some good fortune, to resent it, and that person shouldn't have got it. I deserve to get that, and instead being happy for the other person to get the good fortune. So most of the forms of bhavana are antidotes for the opposite. So there's also what is called asubha bhavana, developing the perception of seeing the impermanent nature of things, or it's often called seeing foulness, but it's a little bit kind of a harsh term. It's true, but still, it's about seeing the reality of objects, that everything is subject to decay, and beauty is a very fleeting thing. There's a popular song, "Beauty is skin deep," right? Well, that's true. Because you get under the skin and it's not beautiful anymore. Try, skinning an animal and then seeing if it looks so nice. So the thing of beauty is skin deep is a true statement. And that's what we try to see in cultivating the perception of impermanence. Not only to this body, but to other things too. And it's because we see the beauty in things, we don't see the underlying nature. We get attached to things too easily. By wanting that beautiful sweet smell, or that taste, or that touch, But all those are very fleeting. And we have to spend a lot of energy and efforts in trying to get these very fleeting and temporary types of pleasures. But the amount of pain and suffering that people have to go through to get that pleasure, which is very fleeting, the painful part lasts longer than the fleeting pleasure, isn't it? You ever experienced that? You might go to a restaurant and had agreed to eat a lot of food, and for half an hour you feel good, but then for a day or many hours you got bellyache and gas or whatever, and have to take Tums for the tummy and stuff like that. Or worse, or even in relationships, trying to get some experience, but the mind goes through all kinds of scheming, conniving, lying, try to get what it thinks that it wants for just a very fleeting few moments of satisfaction. And it's gone. So this is part of the contemplation. This is part of contemplating the reality of things. And to try not to become so dependent on and addicted to the pleasurable feelings, because they're so fleeting. And then we want more, and then we want more. And if we can't get it lawfully, we'll hurt others in order to get it, by breaking all the precepts. So it's a very powerful, meditation about, contemplation of impermanence and seeing with X-ray vision. So it's like seeing with X-ray vision. When you see an object of desire, especially another person, let's say, normally we focus only on the external features, the skin, the hair. Oh, what beautiful skin there. Oh, what beautiful hair. Or nails. People have to paint their fingernails and toenails to make them look nice. But if they're not painted, they don't look so nice. And so on. They have to adorn this body with jewelry and perfumes to make it look something that it's not, really. Now, a lot of people think that's negative, but most people are living in this kind of deluded world. And all those things are stripped away, taken away, and then you're faced with the reality of what it is. So anyway, that's a type of meditation. So anyway, the word, the bhavana. So there's many kinds of bhavana developing the mind, but the main overall practice that's good for everybody is the satipatthana bhavana. That means cultivating the foundations of mindfulness, and also the tranquility and the concentration that comes from mindfulness. And actually, concentration is simply unbroken mindfulness. And this idea that you have to just stop and just focus on one object and just only focus on that itself, that's a misguided or lopsided idea about what concentration is. That you can attain first you have to be mindful of the hindrances, as we talked about earlier today. Otherwise, you're not going to get concentrated. That's why mindfulness is always talked about first, because you gain the concentration through the practice of mindfulness. Okay. This is a question related to, I guess, the yoga. As soon as the stretching started, after this morning's talk, I felt very hot. I felt like a lot of energy was rushing to my head, and repeatedly felt I was starting to black out what was happening. Well, that's true, that can happen. What's happening is that through the yoga and the breathing and a combination of them, the life force gets activated, and it starts to flow through the nadis, which are etheric, non-visible kind of channels which the prana energy, the vital force, circulates. And because we have blocked, because of our stiffness and other things, we're blocked in a lot of places. And so that energy is trying to flow, but it gets built up behind these blockages, and sometimes that may create some heat. Or your nervous system is not strong enough yet to handle that flow of energy. It's like, running voltage through wires. In construction, you have to use the right type of electrical wires to handle certain types of currents, right? Because if you don't, if you use a weak gauged wire to handle 240 volts, then it could cause, a fire or burnout. So the same way most people's nervous systems are weak because they don't practice, and they have blockages and impurities that will block that energy. So, when you're doing, you might feel, getting a little warmth, because that energy is, it's like kinetic energy. And our body is 98 degrees, right? So that means that energy of the cells is producing heat through eating and metabolism and so on. There's heat generated in the body. And doing yoga helps to, also move that, the going in and out of the postures and with the breathing, that helps to generate a strong flow. So if you're not used to that, then you can get these type of experience. It doesn't mean they're bad, but you shouldn't get to the point where you're going to feel like you're going to black out. But I myself have blacked out a few times when I was doing yoga the first couple of years because of, trying to, especially with back bends. Back bends is one of the most powerful of the yoga exercises because of the spine. And the spine is the main conduit of the life force. You've all heard of the Kundalini, right? And so on, the energy in the center of the hollow core of the spinal cord. But anyway, there's some reality to that, although we don't talk about that within Buddhist practice. But that the back bends when you flex the spine, that gets the energy moving. And if again you're not ready for that, it could cause some shaking in the body, or it could cause you to feel like you're going to black out. It's like the wires going to the brain can't handle that energy. So you have to go easy at it. So whenever you feel that point of like you're getting dizzy or feel like blacking out, stop and squat down to the ground until that passes off, because we don't want you to fall down. It's happened to me and it's happened to other people sometimes. Not very often, but it can. Especially with the back bends. So you have to be careful and not to bend back too far. And you have the first time and gradually, see. So, those things are not dangerous if you do it in a systematic way, but there's always people that hear something and they want to immediately, try to do it to the most advanced level, and then they wind up getting in trouble. So there's an example of a guy in India at the yoga ashram where I went. Actually, it didn't happen there at the time, but my yoga teacher was talking about it. Some, Western person who might have been an athletic jock or something, but he was a smoker, I think. And he heard about the headstand, how the headstand's like a really good yoga posture and has all kind of benefits. So, he wanted to do it. And normally when you learn the headstand, they say don't stand on the head very long, because you have to strengthen the capillaries in the brain, because they're getting a tremendous amount of blood. When you're standing on the head, you got a tremendous amount of blood going down into the brain. And smoking weakens the capillaries of the brain. And he was warned not to stand very long, but he was belligerent and stood. And he died. His brain burst. He had blood coming out of his ears and everywhere else. But, that's a very extreme example. So, don't worry about it. But that's why I don't teach headstands to anybody. Shoulder stands are a little bit better. But anyway, I'm saying that there's not, you have to do things systematically, and you have to do things gradually, and not to go to the extremes. So again, if this happens, like tomorrow or any time, just to, if you're worried about it, then just don't overdo it. Especially with the back bends, or if you start getting too hot or feeling that kind of feeling, then stop for at least a while until that kind of dissipates a bit, and then. So this question is how do you practice mudita and upekkha for the Brahma Viharas? Now, mudita and upekkha are two of those Brahma Viharas that I had just talked about before. And the other two are metta and karuna. So the four Brahma Viharas, Brahma Vihara means dwelling with God, the literal translation. So these are supposedly, if people imagine a kind of a god or something, they imagine they would have these qualities of universal love and compassion and so on. So these are considered godlike qualities of the mind. Because they go beyond the ego and just thoughts of I and me and myself. They're very expanded states of mind that embrace the whole of humanity. And normally they're given in an order. Now, when you read things in the Buddhist teaching, the Buddha mentioned these things in particular order, and there's a reason for that. Just as when you read directions on everything, there's a reason. You start with number 1 and you go to number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And so the same way with there's a systematic order of development in the Buddhist teachings, like the Four Noble Truths, especially the Eightfold Path that we'll talk about later. And the four foundations of mindfulness is a very good example. You start with the body because the body is the entryway, and that leads to the feelings, and then leads to the mental states, and each one is a stepping stone to the next one. If you just try to immediately start practicing Dhammanupassana without developing first mindfulness and being grounded and centered and developing detachment to the body and feelings and mental states, you're never going to get anywhere properly, or it'll be much more difficult. So it's like putting the cart before the horse. So with the Brahma Viharas also, metta is the easiest one to practice. And it's reciting these verses that are quite common, thinking, may all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. And sometimes you start it with yourself, and then you go to your family members, and gradually to strangers on the street, and then eventually everybody just wishing that they would be well and happy. So it's primarily a mental exercise. It's an antidote for anger and ill will, as I mentioned already. It's mostly a mental exercise. But also, in our dealings with people, it means being friendly towards people and, merely that, not having prejudices and so on, but being friendly. Because if you're not friendly to people, how can you have compassion for them? So compassion is harder to practice than metta. Because compassion is more active. That you have to actually do something for people. So if you have compassion, help a little lady across the street, help a person if they're sick, or if somebody's in need, you help them. That means that you're actually giving time. Where metta doesn't take a whole lot of time, it's just thinking, may all beings be well and happy and peaceful, and no special time, you're just being friendly, okay, But with compassion, you have to go out of your way to practice compassion. Volunteer, for 2 hours in the evening at a soup kitchen, or whatever. So many volunteer kind of places. So it helps us to weaken the sense of me. What can I do with my time? And, instead, you feel the suffering of others. So if something is suffering, you want to relieve that suffering. Like if you see a a cockroach struggling or a mouse struggling to get out of the sink, instead of just saying, I die, or deliberately. You have compassion for its suffering. You can see it's suffering, right? So pick it up on a piece of paper like Larry does, take it outside or somewhere else. So it's that kind of wanting to alleviate the suffering of others. But it takes more of your time. So that's why it's harder to practice than just metta. And you can't practice it if you don't have metta, really. How can you go out and help people if you're unfriendly to them? No. And then mudita. Mudita means, it's translated as sympathetic joy, but it means being happy at the good fortune of others, even to your own bad luck or detriment. So especially, let's say you and somebody else are vying for the same job at your company, and the other person gets the promotion instead of you. Now, most people would say, they didn't deserve that, I should have got that, right? And probably. Especially if the other person might have told lies about you or did other things that, turn the boss in his favor instead of you, you'd have resentment. So sympathetic joy is having joy at the good fortune of others. Or if somebody else wins a lottery, maybe you bought hundreds of lottery tickets over a couple of years, and you hear that somebody in this first lottery ticket they ever bought, hit the $1 million jackpot. You probably, say, I should have got that. So again, that goes deeper. So it's even harder to practice than the compassion. And then then equanimity, actually, equanimity means even-mindedness. That means not reacting with attachment to certain things and aversion to other things, that the mind's sitting in the middle. So it's not being disturbed or elated or deflated by anything that might be occurring in it or around it. And actually, you can't practice equanimity, really. Equanimity is the end result of developing your mindfulness and concentration. So it's the end result of practice. That's why these are mentioned at the end of everything. They come only in the third and fourth jhanas. It comes only at the last stage of insight before enlightenment. It comes as the fourth Brahma Vihara. So, it's close to that pure awareness kind of state. That's why when you read the description of the fourth jhana, it says purified mindfulness and equanimity. Purified mindfulness and equanimity. It's a state just before enlightenment. So, what we practice, when people say they're practicing equanimity, basically you're practicing mindfulness and restraining yourself. So you're trying to be equanimous. But true equanimity is a very advanced level. You can't really practice it unless you've already practiced other things, because it just doesn't work that way.
Bhante, in Majjhima Nikaya number 62, the Buddha gave advice to Rahula, meditate like the earth. If you meditate like the earth, agreeable and disagreeable contacts will not invade your mind and remain. Is that a way to meditate, to cultivate equanimity?
You would have to have equanimity to practice that. So, again, we're the four-element meditation actually is that's part of the four elements, making the mind like earth. Because if you pee on the earth doesn't shout back, "Hey, don't do that," right? Or if you throw beautiful scented flowers on it, it says, "Oh, give me more, give me more." No. So that's what is meant by whenever agreeable sounds or disagreeable sounds come, the mind doesn't waver or quake or shiver. The same with the other senses. So it's making it like the earth element. And then the water element too. If you pee in the water, it doesn't shout back at you, or if you put scented perfume in it, it doesn't react. And the same with the wind element and the fire element. The fire will burn up, anything, whether it's beautiful or ugly. And the wind will blow anything that's beautiful or ugly away too. So it's kind of just, you have to understand the meaning of these things to make your mind like that. Whatever comes through the senses, through your mindfulness and understanding, you blow it away, the wind element. Blow that negative thought out of your mind. Or burn it up with wisdom. Burn up that negative thought by seeing its impermanence and selfless nature. Burn it up with wisdom. So anyway, that's the way that's the advice that the Buddha was given. So it is a type of equanimity, yes, but it's that's what requires already a deep level of mindfulness and restraint and wisdom to be able to keep the mind steady in that way, not being affected by what's happening in you, even when strong pains arise up, and so on.